Dick and family, we just want to say we love you. Love you. What I was thinking as I was singing this morning, can you imagine, friends, first Sunday in heaven, what kind of a worship service they had? I'll bet you how awesome it's going to be when we get to worship up there. This morning I want to speak on what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do if you're driving in Pueblo and nobody uses the blinker? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do if someone stops at the stoplight and they don't take off when it turns green right away? What would Jesus do? You think he'd have road rage? I don't think so. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, so whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. And 2 Peter says, to this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. It was a beautiful Sunday morning in the little town of Raymond. The members of the First Church of Raymond were all decked out in their Sunday best, and they were enjoying another inspirational worship service. Rachel Winslow, an attractive young lady, had just finished singing a beautiful arrangement of the song, Where He Leads Me, I Will Follow. The pastor, Reverend Henry Maxwell, stood up, walked over to the podium, and began to deliver his message to the congregation. Today's message was being a disciple of Christ and following his example. And as usual, Pastor Maxwell did a wonderful job of delivering the message. But just before the close of the service, a man who'd been seated on the back of the church stood up and made his way down the aisle to the front of the auditorium. The man looked to be in about his 30s. His clothes were dirty. They were torn. He looked as if he hadn't had a bath in several days. He turned around to face the congregation and he said, you know, I've been wondering about something ever since I came in here. And with your pastor's permission, I would just like to say a word at the close of the service. He said, first of all, I want you to know that I'm not drunk and I'm not crazy. I'm perfectly harmless. But you see, if I die, which is very likely, I want the satisfaction of knowing that I had to stay in a place like this and believe this and before this sort of a crowd. Well, the people didn't know what to think or say, so they just sat there and listened to what he had to say. He told them that he was unemployed, even though he'd been looking for a job for several months. And then he asked them a very important question. He said, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean? What do you really mean when you sing, I'll go with him, all the way? Do you mean that you're willing to deny yourself or even suffer like he did as you seek to save those who are lost? And then, after a short pause, the man told the congregation that the other night he'd listened to another group of Christians sing several beautiful songs. He told them that as he sat listening to those beautiful old hymns, a thought came to his mind. He said, you know, there seems to be an awful lot of trouble in this world. And I think that somehow wouldn't exist if all the people who sing Christian songs would go and live them out. Then he shook his head and he looked at the pastor and the crowd again before saying, I suppose I just don't understand. But what would Jesus do? Is that what you mean by following in his steps? And then all of a sudden the man collapsed. Reverend Maxwell quickly dismissed the crowd, and a doctor in the congregation came to the man's aid. But there wasn't much he could do. The man never regained consciousness and died later that afternoon. Now the incident I just shared with you never really took place, but it's challenged thousands of Christians around the world to take a good look at what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. It comes from a book, In His Steps. We've got a copy in the back there. I've read it 3 or 4 times. I love that book. It was written way back in 1896 by the man of Charles Sheldon, who was a pastor of a church in Topeka, Kansas, which, remember, that's a suburb of heaven. This book and another book entitled What Would Jesus Do is a contemporary version of Sheldon's book that was written by his great-grandson. And these books with the inspiration behind these little bracelets with the letters WWJD. Remember those bracelets? They stand for what would Jesus do? The bracelet serves as a reminder to the individual wearing it that they're a disciple of Christ. And therefore what they say and what they do is reflection on Him and His teachings. That's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? What we say and what we do is a reflection on Him. Ooh, that's kind of scary. This morning I want to use that question as we discuss some practical ways of living out our faith in the 21st century. And I want to do this by presenting you with a number of real-life situations that Jesus faced and that we will also face. So number one, what would Jesus do if He came across someone in need? Of course, this was something that happened all the time. When Jesus wasn't teaching or preaching, He was trying to meet the physical and spiritual needs of all the people. And one day, Jesus had spent much of the day teaching and ministering to a large crowd of people there by the Sea of Galilee. When His disciples came to Him and encouraged Him to send the people away so that they could go find something to eat since it was getting late, and it was a very remote place, Jesus told the disciples, "You feed them. You feed them." Well, of course, those disciples, they protested and said there was no way they could find enough food for a crowd that big. And even if they could, they didn't have enough money to buy it. But about that time, Andrew walked up with a young boy. He had 5 small loaves and a bread. And he had a couple of fish that he was willing to share. And Jesus then told the disciples to have the people sit down. He took the loaves and the fish from the boy, thanked God for providing them for him, broke them into pieces, and gave them to the disciples to pass out to the people. And you know the rest of the story. After they finished eating, the disciples went around and picked up the leftovers, and there was enough to fill 12 baskets full, which maybe they took to the soup kitchen. A seminary professor told his class that if anyone wanted some extra credit points, to meet at the library at 2 p.m. for a very special assignment. So at 2 o'clock, 15 students showed up at the library. He divided them into 3 groups of 5. And he gave each person in the group an envelope and told them to walk across campus to Stewart Hall. Now, he went on to say that they only had 15 minutes to get there. And if for some reason they were late getting there, it would affect their extra credit rate. The professor waited a couple of minutes and then gave each of the people in the second group an envelope with their instructions on it. They too were told to go to Stewart Hall, but they were given 45 minutes to get there. A few minutes later, he handed out the last 5 envelopes to the last 5 students and informed them that they had 3 hours to get to Stewart Hall. But what the professor didn't tell the students was that he had asked 3 drama students to meet them along the way, acting like people in great need. One of the students was walking around with his head in his hands, moaning out loud, pretending to be in great pain. The second student positioned himself between the library and Stewart Hall and proceeded to lie down on the ground and pretend to be unconscious. And the third drama student positioned himself on the very steps of Stewart Hall, and he was having an epileptic seizure. Of course, what the professor was trying to do was to see how many of his students would stop to help the individuals in need. And the results were quite interesting. Not one of the first 5 students that were only given 15 minutes to get to their destination stopped. 2 students in the second group of 5 stopped, but all 5 of the last group stopped to see what they could do for each of the people in need. The professor concluded that time was definitely a factor. And of course, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus taught his disciples the importance of being willing to help those in need. And maybe one of the reasons that the Good Samaritan was able to stop and help the man who'd been beaten and left for dead was because he wasn't in a hurry. While the priest and Levite were both living in the fast lane and simply didn't have the time to allow themselves to be sidetracked. But that made me wonder, how many people does God place in our path every day that really need our help? But we're so busy that we don't even see them. much less help them. Because too often we see someone in need, instead of helping them, we'll judge them. We think to ourselves, man, if they just get a job or stop doing this or that, they didn't have enough money to buy something to eat or to pay their bills. But let me remind you that Jesus taught his disciples not to judge anyone. And so, I think we can safely say that Jesus always did everything he could to help someone in need. And as his disciples, we should do the same. What would Jesus do about forgiving those who had wronged him in some way? This is a big one. We hold grudges. What would Jesus do about forgiving those who had wronged him in some way? Peter came to Jesus one day and asked him a question about forgiveness. You can find it in Matthew 18:21. And here's what it says. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? You see, most Jewish rabbis taught the people that they should forgive someone up to 3 times. So old Peter thought, wow, 7 times, that'll be sufficient. But notice how Jesus answered him. He said, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, or 70 times 7. You see, Jesus practiced what he preached. While hanging on the cross, Jesus said, Father, Daddy, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And following the resurrection, Jesus appeared to his disciples along the Sea of Galilee. The night Jesus was arrested, Peter had promised him that he was willing to die for him, even if the other disciples weren't. God despite his promise to the Lord. When it came right down to it, Peter denied knowing the Lord 3 times. Peter's one who denied Jesus. Yet, Jesus not only forgave him, but gave him a tremendous amount of responsibility as a leader in the early church. Jesus taught Peter and the other apostles not to keep track of the sins of people commit against them, but to forgive them. Forgive them. So as Christians, should we do the same? Forgiveness. What would Jesus do about associating with people with questionable reputations? One day Jesus was invited to have dinner in the home of a big shot, a prominent Pharisee. And when word got around that Jesus was there, a woman who didn't exactly have a great reputation came to see him. And Luke records this incident for us. It says, now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. But when a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume all over them. And when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is. Why, she's a sinner. She's a sinner. And then in Matthew it says, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, hey, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. What a comeback. What a comeback. You see, Jesus was a friend of the friendless. He was a friend of the outcasts and loners of society. And as his disciples, should we follow his example? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do about people who lied or insulted him? Remember in the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus said, blessed or happy are you when people insult you, when they persecute you, when they falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And Jesus put these words into practice throughout his life. But it was never more evident than on the day he was crucified. You see, from the time the soldiers arrested him in the Garden of Gethsemane to the time they nailed him to the cross, they did everything they could to demean him, belittle him. They made fun of him. They beat him. They tortured him. They spat upon him. Yet, Jesus didn't curse them or do anything like that. And as we already mentioned, he looked at them and he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Jesus didn't retaliate. He didn't try to get back at the Roman soldiers who had insulted and persecuted him, or the Jewish religious leaders who made fun of him and challenged him to come down from the cross. Instead, he forgave them. And then as followers, we should forgive those who say and do things against us. I know it's hard. People get their feelings hurt over the littlest stuff anymore. But look what they did to Jesus. And he said, Father, forgive us. How about, what would Jesus do about temptation? Anybody here is tempted? The Bible tells us that Jesus was tempted in every way. Which means he was tempted the same way we are tempted, yet he didn't sin. And when Jesus was tempted to turn the stones into bread, he turned to the devil and he said, man doesn't live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. And then Satan tempted him to test God's love by throwing himself off the highest point of the temple. And Jesus responded by saying, hey, do not put the Lord your God to the test. And then when Satan tempted Jesus to bow down and worship him in exchange for the kingdom of the world, Jesus responded by saying, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Jesus used Scripture to overcome temptation. That's one way we can do it. Little Mark was a 10-year-old boy who never misbehaved, never caused problems at school. But unfortunately, he never made very good grades in spelling. And one day during a spelling test, he was tempted to copy off Jane, who always made straight A's in spelling. Now, even though Mark was a Christian, and he knew that it was wrong to cheat, he did it anyway. The teacher saw Mark looking off Jane's paper, and she was very, very shocked and disappointed because she'd always admired him for his honesty. When it came time to collect the test, the teacher noticed Mark did something very unusual. He bowed his head, and he silently prayed. And he asked God to forgive him, and then he ripped up his paper. He decided to take a 0 rather than turning in a paper in which he cheated on. The teacher called Mark up to her desk and said, I was watching you, Mark. I was watching you. And I want you to know that I'm very proud of what you did. Today you really passed a much greater examination than your spelling test. You see, just as Mark's teacher was watching him, there are a lot of people watching those of us who call ourselves Christians to see if what we say and what we do are consistent with the teachings of Jesus Christ that are all found in the Bible. Unfortunately, too many times we aren't too consistent. We forget people are watching us, watching our actions. We forget Jesus is watching us. Mahatma Gandhi, one of the greatest spiritual leaders of India, once made this statement concerning Christianity. He said, if every Christian in India lived according to the principles that Jesus taught in all of Scripture, all of India would be Christian today. And in the book, in his steps, Henry Maxwell, the pastor of the First Church of Raymond, challenged his congregation to make a commitment to God, not to say or do anything for an entire year without first asking themselves the question, what would Jesus do? It literally changed the lives of those who are willing to make that commitment. And I know it'll do the same for us today. So this morning, are you willing to walk as Jesus walked? Are you willing to do what Jesus did? Are you willing to commit yourself not to do anything without first asking the question, what would Jesus do? Lord, that's an important question. What would Jesus do? When we see somebody hungry, and we just go on our way. What would Jesus do? Lord, help us to rely on that question and not rely on ourselves. Help us to remember that people are watching us, what we do, what we say, how we react in certain situations. And help us to remember, what would Jesus do? He would forgive. He would love. So Lord, forgive me for failing you in so many times. I failed you, Lord. But you come back, you let me come back, and I thank you for that. Thank you for being here today, Lord. Speak to each and every one of us today, Lord, in the way that they need spoken of. Again, thank you for Fran and the family, Lord, and all that they've done for your kingdom. Because I know great is their reward. Comfort them, Lord. Until we see her again, Lord, take care of her. Again, thank you for today. Thank you, Lord, that you're perfect. And we're just going to follow you in any way we can. In your name we pray. Amen.